Hi, I'm Sandy Kemsley of column2.com. I'm here today for the Tries to Tech blog with some practical design tips for end-to-end processes. There's a lot of talk about end-to-end processes, but there's not really a standard definition of what that means. For some people, an end-to-end process is one that's a single orchestration, a single process model, where every activity is directly connected to every other activity in some way. So you have like a one big graph. But unless you're modeling at a really high level, hopping departmental boundaries or the boundaries between customer interactions and internal processes causes discontinuities in the process at the point of those handoffs. And handoffs are always where you get problems. Balls get dropped, customer journeys go off the rails, and transactions can end up in a black hole. Now, the reason we have these disjointed processes or departmental processes, they're there for a good reason. Most businesses have functional silos. And this is how businesses are more efficient at what they do. There's a sales department, a credit department, fulfillment, shipping, receivables, and so on. The people in those departments are responsible for making their area work well, but they don't necessarily care about what happens when something leaves their department, as long as they get it off their desk successfully. And the different departments can have very conflicting metrics. So you could have sales trying to maximize the number of new customers by just shoving every possible prospect into the pipeline, but the credit department has to weed out the ones that don't qualify in order to minimize their bad debt metric. So it turns out that your end-to-end process isn't really a process. It's this disjointed set of operations that probably isn't even meeting your customers' expectations. And likely there's nobody responsible for the success of that end-to-end process, in part because nobody has even defined it. So we need to fix two things about this. First, we need to define the complete end-to-end process, not just the individual departmental processes. And second, we need to make sure that there's an owner responsible for that end-to-end process and that that person has their feet held to the fire on meeting the overall metrics. Now, when I start thinking about end-to-end processes with a customer, I start with the customer journey, plus all of the internal processes. You have to see how the internal and external work together and interact. So we start with what kicks off the process. Is it something the customer does, like fill out an application form? Or is it something that happens internally, like a policy renewal reminder that gets generated automatically? And how do we know when it's done, when the process is done? Maybe it's done when the customer's new bank account is opened and they've started doing transactions online. Or it's done when the payment is received for an insurance policy renewal and the customer has the new policy documents in hand. One of the things about customer-facing processes is that the end point almost always has an internal end and an external end, where the customer has validated that they agree that the process is completed, not just that you've done something internally. So the key thing is that that actual process start and end point, especially the end point, can be much broader in scope than just your internal processes, and you need to think about that. So you want to start by mapping out the complete process at a relatively high level. In fact, this model is probably not even going to be executed directly, even if you're doing it in BPMN. And then you're going to dig into those lower level models. These are ones that probably are going to be executed, but you need to understand enough about the technical implementation bits in order to feed that back into the end-to-end model. Because a lot of times, as you get down into the lower level models, you'll have these departmental handoffs between these lower level processes, and the transactions have to flow from one back office system to another. Now, in the ideal situation, that's really simple. You have choreography between those systems, but things are rarely that ideal. So you think about financial services and insurance, where mainframes still rule the back office. And you're going to have some activities like account openings that are still done in overnight batches. So now you have an interactive customer-facing process for filling out an online application form. Then all of those for the day feed into a batch job for creating the accounts overnight. And then the results need to split back into individual customer-facing processes again. Tricky. Now, especially when something goes wrong for one of those transactions during the batch run that wasn't caught by the front-end process, and it needs some manual intervention and another overnight run in order to complete that customer's transaction. Now, meanwhile, the customer is left wondering where their money is. Now, when you start to put this in the context of the customer journey, all of a sudden you realize that you need some new processes that fire off when something goes wrong. So you might need to have something that expedites the fix, notifies the customer, whatever, but it's that doing that model of the end-to-end process that highlights what's missing relative to the true start and end points of the process, not just the idea that you have possibly a retrying internal process that happens without how that might impact the overall customer satisfaction. Now, the second thing we need to fix is how we measure and assign responsibility for this newly defined end-to-end process. So I like to think about Conway's Law, and Conway's Law says organizations design systems that mirror their own communication structure. Now, this includes systems of metrics. So if you only have people worried about their own department, then you probably already have these localized departmental metrics that are optimizing things locally, but to the detriment of the end-to-end process. You need to break through that thinking and get everyone focused on the end-to-end metrics. Now, these are usually directly related to customer satisfaction. They'll have to be things like cycle time and quality that are really visible to the customer. But you can also have the usual sort of cost and efficiency metrics, because if you're not doing a great job at those handoffs, it takes longer and it's more expensive, and eventually these are going to impact customer satisfaction as well. So as you're building your processes, you need to identify the end-to-end metrics and then bake them into every smaller process that forms part of the whole. This gets everyone focused on customer satisfaction rather than just producing widgets. That's it for today. You can find more in my writing and videos on the TriSoTech blog or on my own blog at column2.com. See you next time.